You are not without money because of a lack of effort. And you're also not where you want to be because of a lack of opportunity. If that were the case, you would have solved it already. There is something deeper going on. A pattern. Invisible. Silent. But extremely powerful. A pattern that shapes your decisions every single day, without you even realizing it. And as long as this pattern is active, it doesn't matter how hard you work. Your results will always be limited. Andrew Carnegie, one of the richest men in history, believed that most people don't fail because they lack ability. They fail because they think the wrong way, repeatedly. And this mistake is not obvious. It doesn't show up as a big problem. It disguises itself as logic, as prudence, as being realistic. But in practice, it's exactly what keeps you stuck in scarcity. Think about it. How many times have you had an idea, but before even trying, you already thought about everything that could go wrong? How many times did you want to start something, but decided to wait for the perfect moment? How many times did you choose what felt safe, even knowing it wouldn't move you forward? That's not coincidence. That's a pattern. And the most dangerous part is that it feels right, because it protects you. Protects you from failure. Protects you from loss. Protects you from frustration. But it also prevents you from growing. Carnegie understood something that very few people understand. The human mind was not designed to make you rich. It was designed to keep you safe. And safety almost always conflicts with growth. Because growth requires risk. It requires decisions. It requires action before certainty. But the scarcity pattern does the opposite. It makes you wait. It makes you doubt. It makes you rationalize inaction. And little by little, you begin to live a life where nothing goes terribly wrong, but nothing goes truly right either. And that is dangerous, because it looks like stability, but it's actually stagnation. Now pay attention to this. The invisible pattern of scarcity operates on 3 levels. The first is thought. You begin to believe you need more information, more preparation, more time, but it never ends. There is always something missing. The second level is decision. You choose paths that feel safe, but have no real potential for growth. You trade progress for comfort. And the third level is behavior. You act little. You delay. You procrastinate. And when you do act, you act small. Without intensity, without consistency, without direction. And then comes the result, or rather, the lack of it. And then you reinforce the very same pattern. You look at your life and think, see, it didn't work. But it didn't work because you never truly stepped into the game. You stayed on the sidelines, watching, calculating, waiting, while other people with less talent, less preparation, but with a different mental pattern, move forward. They fail, they adjust, and they grow. Carnegie used to say that wealth begins with a clear decision, not with a perfect plan, not with guarantees, but with a decision. And here's the point that changes everything. People stuck in scarcity try to eliminate risk before they act. People who prosper learn to deal with risk while they act. That's the difference. It's not intelligence. It's not luck. It's pattern. Now think about your own life. How many opportunities have you let pass? Not because they were bad, but because they weren't safe enough. How many times have you confused caution with fear? And worse, how many times have you called that being responsible? This is the most common form of self-deception. You create a beautiful story to justify the lack of action. But deep down, you feel it. Something is holding you back, and that something is not external. It's internal. It's the pattern. And the truth is, it won't disappear on its own. You can keep watching videos, reading books, learning techniques. But if this pattern remains active, nothing truly changes, because knowledge without action does not create transformation, and action without breaking the pattern becomes repetition. Now comes the part no one likes to hear. Changing this pattern is not comfortable. It's not fast. And it's not simple. Because you will have to start doing things before you feel ready. You will have to make decisions without having all the answers. You will have to expose yourself to risk, even with fear. And that directly conflicts with everything your mind wants. But that is exactly where change begins. The moment you realize that waiting a little longer won't save you, it will only keep you in the same place. Because the scarcity pattern does not break with time. It breaks with different action. Uncomfortable action. Conscious action. Repeated action. Even when it feels uncertain. And if you keep doing what you've always done, thinking the way you've always thought, deciding the way you've always decided, the result cannot be different. It's already defined. Now the real question is, will you keep choosing protection? Or will you start choosing growth? Because the two do not happen at the same time. And this is exactly where most people step back. Because while all of this makes sense in theory, in practice, it hurts. It hurts to act without guarantees. It hurts to make decisions without certainty. It hurts to lose control. But what almost no one realizes is that you are already paying a price. It's just an invisible price. It's the price of staying where you are. It's the price of watching time pass while your life doesn't change. And that price is much more expensive because it doesn't show up all at once. It accumulates day after day, year after year, in the form of missed opportunities, unexecuted ideas, unrealized potential. And when you finally notice, years have already gone by, and you're still getting ready. Now let me show you something that can completely change how you see this. The scarcity pattern doesn't just stop you from acting. It changes how you interpret reality. You start seeing risk where there is opportunity. You start seeing difficulty where there is growth. You start seeing problems before even trying. And this creates a filter, a mental filter, where everything that could move you forward seems too dangerous. And everything that keeps you where you are seems acceptable. This filter is subtle, but extremely powerful, because it doesn't block you directly. It convinces you. It makes you believe you're being smart, when in reality, you're being conditioned. Carnegie talked a lot about this, about how the mind, when not directed, begins to operate on autopilot. And that autopilot is almost always based on fear. Fear of losing, fear of failing, fear of not being enough. And that fear doesn't need to be intense. It just needs to be constant, small but present. And that alone is enough to keep you stuck. Now notice something interesting. People who live in scarcity don't necessarily make big wrong decisions. They make small limiting decisions every single day. They choose not to start today. They choose not to expose themselves. They choose not to try something new. They choose not to invest in themselves. And these small choices, over time, create a lifetime of limitation. It's not one big mistake. It's a sequence of decisions that are too safe. And the problem with excessive safety is that it eliminates potential. Because everything that has potential has risk. Everything that can take you to the next level requires some level of discomfort. But the scarcity pattern conditions you to avoid that. So you live in a zone where nothing collapses, but nothing evolves. Now let's go deeper. There is a fundamental difference between those who remain in scarcity and those who build wealth. And that difference lies in how they relate to uncertainty. Most people try to reduce uncertainty before acting. But people who prosper act despite uncertainty. They understand that clarity comes after movement, not before. And that changes everything. Because if you wait for total clarity, you never start. And if you never start, you never learn. And if you never learn, you never evolve. It's a cycle. And that cycle keeps you exactly where you are. Now think about how many times you've said, "I don't know enough yet. It's not the right time. I need to prepare more." These phrases sound reasonable. But many times, They are just sophisticated versions of fear. And as long as you keep believing them, the pattern remains intact. Now, there is a turning point, and it doesn't come when you feel ready. It comes when you become aware. Aware of the pattern, aware of your decisions, aware of your justifications. Because the moment you see it, it becomes impossible to pretend you don't. And then you start noticing things that used to go unnoticed. You notice when you're delaying without a real reason. You notice when you're avoiding something important. You notice when you're choosing comfort instead of what's necessary. And this level of awareness already begins to break the pattern. But it's not enough, because understanding alone changes nothing. You need to act differently, even if it's small at first. But it has to be different, because if the action is the same, the result will also be the same. Now let me give you a practical way to identify if this pattern is still active in you. Pay attention to this. Whenever an opportunity appears, observe your first reaction. If it is, what if it goes wrong? What if I lose? What if it doesn't work? That's the pattern speaking. Now, there's nothing wrong with thinking that. The problem is stopping there. Because people who grow also think about risk. But they don't stop at risk. They go further. They ask, what if it works? What can I learn from this? What's the worst case scenario? And how would I handle it? Do you see the difference? One type of thinking paralyzes you. The other moves you forward. And this small shift starts to reprogram your pattern. Now, this doesn't happen overnight, because this pattern was built over years. Repeated, reinforced, validated. So you need to replace it the same way, with repetition, with consistency, with intention. Every time doubt shows up, you act. Every time fear appears, you move forward a little. It doesn't have to be big, but it has to be real, because small action is still action, and accumulated action creates transformation. Now, there's something even deeper here. The scarcity pattern also affects how you see yourself. You start doubting your ability, questioning if you're enough, comparing yourself, and that erodes your confidence. And without confidence, every decision becomes harder. So you get even more stuck. It becomes a full cycle. Thought, decision, action, result, reinforcement. And if you don't interrupt this cycle, it keeps running indefinitely. But the good news is that you don't have to break everything at once. You just need to interrupt it at one point. A single point. And the most accessible one is action. Because even with doubt, you can act. Even with fear, you can act. Even without certainty, you can act. And every time you do that, you weaken the old pattern and strengthen a new one. A pattern of growth, a pattern of progress, a pattern of building. And little by little, your identity starts to change. You stop being someone who waits and become someone who takes action. And that changes everything.
Because at the end of the day, it's not just about what you do. It's about who you become while doing it. And that's what most people don't understand. They think they need to feel confident first, and then take action. But reality works the other way around. Confidence comes after action. It is built, tested, proven. Every time you act despite fear, you send a clear signal to your mind. I can do this. And that signal, repeated over and over, completely rewires your pattern. Now pay attention to this. The scarcity pattern is not sustained only by fear. It is also sustained by habit. You get used to thinking small. You get used to deciding small. You get used to acting little. And after a while, it starts to feel normal. It even feels natural. But it's not. It's conditioned. And anything that has been conditioned can be reconditioned. But there's an important detail here. You don't change this pattern by thinking differently. You change it by acting differently. Because the brain learns through experience, not through theory. You can understand all of this perfectly and still stay in the same place if you don't act. Now, There is a specific type of action that starts to break this pattern faster. And it's not just any action. It's the action you've been avoiding. The one you keep postponing. The one you rationalize. The one you know you should do, but don't. That's the key. Because right there is the breaking point. Every time you face that action, you weaken the old pattern and strengthen a new one. But if you keep avoiding it, you reinforce the scarcity pattern. Simple as that. Now think about this honestly. What is the action you are avoiding today? The one you've thought about many times, but always found a reason not to start. Maybe it's starting a project. Maybe it's investing in something. Maybe it's putting yourself out there. Maybe it's learning a new skill. It doesn't matter what it is. What matters is that you know, and that knowing is already a signal. Now, what you do with it defines everything, because ignoring that signal maintains the pattern. Responding to it starts to break it, and it doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, it won't be. And that's another point that holds people back. The idea that it has to be done right. But who said that? Who said it has to come out perfect? Who said you need to master everything before you start? That's also part of the pattern. The pursuit of perfection is often a sophisticated form of procrastination. Because while you're trying to make it perfect, you delay making it real. And the real is the only thing that produces results. Now let me show you something that may seem simple, but is extremely powerful. Every time you make a quick decision and act immediately afterward, you break the cycle of doubt. Because doubt needs time to grow. It needs space. It needs repetition. But when you decide and act, you cut it off at the root. And that creates a new pattern. A pattern of execution. And execution is what separates those who stay in theory from those who build results. Now, this doesn't mean acting without thinking. It means not getting stuck in thinking. There is a huge difference between strategy and paralysis disguised as strategy. And most people confuse the two. They spend so much time planning that they never enter into motion. And without movement, there is no adjustment. Without adjustment, there is no evolution. And without evolution, there is no result. So what you need is not more planning. It's more execution, more attempts, more real experience. Because that's what will give you clarity. Not before, after. Now, there's something even deeper. The scarcity pattern also influences how you deal with mistakes. You start seeing mistakes as failure, as a sign of incapacity, as something that should be avoided. But this is completely inverted. Mistakes are feedback. Mistakes are adjustment. Mistakes are part of the process. Those who grow make more mistakes, not fewer, but they learn faster and adjust faster, while those who avoid mistakes avoid growth and remain at the same level. So if you want to break out of this pattern, you need to change your relationship with mistakes. Stop running from them and start using them. Because every mistake contains information, and that information brings you closer to the result. Now think about this. If you knew you could fail 10 times, but succeed on the 11th, would you try? Probably yes. So what's the problem? The problem is that you want to succeed before failing. And that doesn't exist. Success comes after a sequence of failures. It always has. It always will. But the scarcity pattern makes you forget that. It makes you seek safety, where there should be movement. It makes you avoid the process, while desiring the result. And that creates frustration. Because you want something, but you're not willing to go through what it takes to get there. And that needs to change. Not in theory, but in practice. Real. Applied. Because in the end, it all comes down to this. You can keep being someone who waits for the right moment, or you can become someone who creates the moment. And those who create fail, adjust, learn, and grow. Those who wait observe, analyze, doubt, and remain. And that choice doesn't happen once. It happens every day. In small decisions. In simple actions. In almost imperceptible moments. But when accumulated, they completely define the direction of your life. So the question returns, but now more directly. Will you keep repeating the same pattern? Or will you start building a new one? Because the answer is not in what you think right now. It's in what you do from this point forward.
And this is exactly the point, where most people deceive themselves once again. They think that changing the pattern means doing something big, something extreme, something that changes everything at once. But that's not how it works. In reality, a new pattern begins almost imperceptibly, with small decisions, small actions, small changes in behavior, but done with consistency, because the scarcity pattern was not built in a single day. It was built through hundreds, maybe thousands of small decisions, and that's exactly how it will be replaced. Now pay attention to this. There is a specific moment when you feel like you should act, an impulse, an idea, a desire to do something different. But right after that, a voice comes in, a doubt, a justification. I'll deal with this later. Now is not the right time. I need to think about it more. This is the critical point. This is where the pattern shows up most strongly. And it is also where you have the opportunity to break it. Because if you act in that exact moment, even in a simple way, you change direction. Now, if you delay, the pattern gets reinforced. And this happens many times throughout the day. But most people don't notice. Because these are quick decisions, almost automatic. But they are what shape everything. Now imagine this happening for months or years. You start to understand why nothing changes. It's not a lack of ability. It's repetition of behavior. Now let me give you a more strategic view of this. Every time you choose what is comfortable, you strengthen the old pattern. Every time you choose what is necessary, you build a new one. And these two forces are always competing. Always. There is no moment when this stops. So it's not about getting it right once. It's about choosing right repeatedly, even when it's hard, even when you don't feel like it, even when no one is watching. Because patterns don't change through intensity. They change through consistency. Now, there's something that accelerates this process a lot. Environment. If you stay in the same environment, with the same references, with the same stimuli, the old pattern is constantly reinforced because everything around you validates that behavior. So you need to, in some way, change that. It could be what you consume. It could be who you spend time with. It could be the type of content you absorb. But there needs to be a shift because the environment influences more than you realize. It shapes your decisions without you noticing. Now, this doesn't mean you need to change everything at once, but you do need to start adjusting. Because if the environment stays the same, the tendency is for you to stay the same as well. Now let's go even deeper. There is an identity behind the pattern. You don't just act in a certain way. You see yourself in a certain way. You see yourself as someone too cautious, or someone who always waits, or someone who never finishes what they start. And as long as that identity exists, the behavior follows, because you act according to who you believe you are. So it's not enough to change your actions. You need to start changing how you see yourself. And this happens in a very specific way, through evidence. Every time you act differently, you create a new piece of evidence, small but real. And these pieces of evidence, accumulated, begin to rewrite your identity. You stop being someone who only thinks and become someone who executes. You stop being someone who avoids and become someone who faces things. But this doesn't happen because you decided mentally. It happens because you proved it to yourself. And proof comes from action. Always. Now, there's an important detail here. You don't need to wait to feel different in order to act. In fact, you need to act to start feeling different. This completely breaks common logic. But that's how it works. Feelings follow action, not the other way around. So if you keep waiting for motivation, confidence, certainty, you may wait a long time. But if you act, even without all of that, those things start to appear gradually. Now, let me show you the mistake that causes many people to give up. They do something different for a while, but since the result hasn't appeared yet, they go back to the old pattern. And that reinforces even more the belief that it doesn't work. But the problem is not the method. It's the lack of enough time. Because changing patterns does not produce immediate results. It first creates an internal change, then a change in behavior, and only then, a change in results. And this sequence needs to be respected. If you interrupt it halfway, you never reach the end. So, patience here is not optional. It's essential. Now, this doesn't mean standing still and waiting. It means continuing to act, even without seeing immediate results, because the result is being built, even if it's not yet visible. And this is the part that requires maturity, trusting the process before external evidence appears. Because if you depend only on results to continue, you stop too early. But if you understand the process, you keep going. And those who keep going inevitably arrive. Now, there is one final layer to all of this. Responsibility. As long as you keep attributing your results to external factors, you maintain the pattern. Because if the fault is outside, the control is also outside. And if the control is outside, you change nothing. But the moment you assume that your decisions are creating your results, everything changes. Because now you have power. It may not be comfortable, but it is liberating. Because if you created it, you can recreate it. But that requires honesty. It requires stopping self-deception. It requires looking at your own life and recognizing the patterns. No excuses, no justifications, no softening. And that is not easy, but it is necessary. Because only what you can see, you can change, and only what you take responsibility for, you can control. So, in the end, it's not about money. It's not about opportunity. It's not about luck. It's about pattern. And as long as the pattern stays the same, the result will too. But the moment you start to change, even slowly, even imperfectly, even uncertainly, everything begins to reorganize. Because you are no longer reacting. You are building. And that is the beginning of a completely different life.